Hey guys, and welcome to Anchor to Truth. Today we are diving into chapter 23 in the book of Jubilees. So let's get started.
All right, guys, let's pick it up in verse 1. He says, "And he placed 2 fingers of Jacob on his eyes, and he blessed the Elohim of Elohim. And he covered his face and stretched out his feet and slept the sleep of eternity and was gathered to his fathers. And notwithstanding all this, Jacob was lying in his bosom and knew not that Abraham, his father's father, was dead. And Jacob awoke from his sleep, and behold, Abraham was cold as ice. And he said, Father, Father. But there was none that spake. And he knew that he was dead, and he arose from his bosom and ran and told Rebekah his mother. And Rebekah went to Isaac in the night and told him. And they went together, and Jacob with them, and a lamp was in his hand. And when they had gone in, they found Abraham lying dead. And Isaac fell on the face of his father, and he wept and kissed him. And the voices were heard in the house of Abraham, and Ishmael his son arose and went to Abraham his father, and wept over Abraham his father, he and all the house of Abraham. And they wept with a great weeping. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the double cave near Sarah his wife. And they wept for him 40 days, all the men of his house, and Isaac and Ishmael, and all their sons, and all the sons of Keturah in their places. And all the days of weeping for Abraham were ended. And he lived 3 jubilees and 4 weeks of years, 175 years, and completed the days of his life, being old and full of days."
So without being too funny, we've had Abraham on his last days for a few chapters now.
Yeah,
So, we're,
right.
if you go back to a couple chapters ago, we're like, okay, and this is Abraham's final words. This is Abraham's final blessing. This is Abraham's final prayers. So
Yeah.
here we see, unfortunately, we know how the story went, but Abraham now is dead. He actually has his last breath, and it's a sad part of the story, but it's a part where we see, like we talked about in our last video, where you see this covenant being renewed and it's being transferred. So we're starting to see like the actual transaction happen now. Abraham has passed away. He's down living with his fathers, or I guess asleep with his fathers, not living there. But and that we see that double cave come back, that cave where he's buried with Sarah. So yeah, this chapter 23, we finally see, Abraham has passed on.
You don't think we're going to get another retake of this going on?
Right.
Okay, well, the first thing that I had, guys, that I wanted to bring up is right here in the very beginning. What do you guys think this is all about? And he placed 2 fingers of Jacob on his eyes. So this would have been Abraham placed 2 fingers of Jacob on his eyes.
Yes.
Blessed the Elohim of Elohim and covered his face and stretched out his feet and slept. So what is this, guys? What do you think this is all about?
I think it literally is this, what kind of like what Jonathan was alluding to. Like, we've been watching Abraham kind of die for the last 3 chapters, and passing on. But I think this is it. And I think
Sure.
Abraham himself knows this is it. And out of a last, one last way of just giving that final blessing to Jacob, knowing that Jacob's sleeping and Jacob's at peace. Jacob's like he's knocked out. And Abraham knows this. He knows that. So I believe he just puts his 2 fingers on his eyes and just does one more blessing, knowing this is it. And it says he stretches out his feet and goes to be with the fathers.
I guess what I'm getting at is, why would he take 2 fingers of Jacob and put on his eyes? Like, what is the purpose or significance of that? You guys have any idea?
It was definitely a strange phrase to throw in there, and it's something that seemed slightly out of the ordinary, because I picked up on that too, of like, it'd be different if it was like, and then Jacob chose to close his eyes while he's dying. But, it's like,
Right.
well, I'm going to close my own eyes with your hands. It doesn't make a lot of logical sense. But, we do see that played out a lot in our like modern cinematography. When someone dies, you close their eyes for them if they're still open or whatever. So
Yep.
I think that's probably where we're getting some of this idea from. But the way it makes it sound is Jacob was asleep. So he had to take Jacob's hands to say, all right, you are going to put me to sleep essentially, but you don't even know because you're asleep. So I'm going to go ahead and just do this transaction for you. Kind of like when the father did the covenant with the animals being split in half and all that. And it says he put him in a deep sleep and all that. He's like, so I'm going to do this for you. Essentially, you don't even know that you have closed the story out, but I know. And whenever I go ahead and go to sleep, you're going to wake up and you're going to see the result of everything. And you didn't have to do anything. You did it, but you didn't know you did it.
I do find that really interesting. You know, it's not a very, it's almost a little unsettling to see someone who's deceased with their eyes open, you know?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this was a way to ensure that his eyes would remain closed, maybe. So it says that he placed two fingers on his eyes, and he covered his face. So it's almost like a holding down, right? So that the eyes wouldn't open. I mean, maybe that's it, just so that it wouldn't be unsettling for them when they woke up. I don't know. If you guys have any idea what this is alluding to, if there's some kind of tradition you're familiar with or whatever, or if it's
Mm-hmm.
just simply that, just keeping his eyes closed, let us know down in the comments. We'd appreciate that. And I think this is so interesting, this idea, the next part where it says he stretched out his feet, right? What's all that about?
Well, maybe he was getting comfortable. I don't know.
That's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, he just knew that he was about. Well, here's the thing, too. I don't know, just really off the top of my brain. Here it is. Okay, when someone passes, and we know rigor mortis sits in, maybe it's one of those things where it's like, and he stretched out his feet, knowing that I'm going, because you wouldn't want to be in some kind of weird balled up, on your side sleeping, and throughout the entire night, and they go to take you to bury you, and you're kind of like in a weird position. I think it literally is. Let me cover my face and stretch my hands out or my feet out
Maybe
to
so.
be in a better position when they find me. I don't know. That's all I could really think of with that one.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean,
Yep.
there's simplicity to it. It makes sense. We don't have to go down, a bunch of rabbit holes of trying to figure this out, but and placing things into the story that's not there. So I don't know. If anybody has anything else, please let us know. But that just seems like the simplest explanation to me. So I agree
Mhm.
with you there, Joe.
And I think, pretty much the rest of this part of the story speaks for itself, guys. I mean, just he passes on, just kind of gives us some details about, he wakes, when Jacob wakes up, granddad's cold as ice. Granddad's been gone for a little bit,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and then from there this is anything that any of us could have experienced in life with a loved one passing here, where the word, it starts getting, you making the phone calls, you're doing the things, hey, so-and-so's passed. And then all of a sudden, and then what happens usually, even in our time, all the family, friends, we all get together to mourn the loss of our loved one. I think that's exactly what's playing out here in this story. I think there's a whole lot we could dig into that one with, but if you
Well,
guys see something,
yeah, I actually, kind of going back to what we spoke about in our previous study, we talked about how Jacob was at peace, right, laying there in the bosom.
yep,
He was in such peace, that he wasn't waking up every 5 minutes. He wasn't, constantly feeling like he had to check on. He didn't pass out from exhaustion and then, oh, I got to wake up and check on Grandpa. He was truly at peace in this situation. He was laying
Mhm.
there and was really resting, really sleeping. So he had been there. What would think would be several hours if he was cold as
yeah,
ice. I mean, I don't know exactly how long it takes for a body to be cold, but I know to be completely cold, it might take a little bit. I would say at least probably an hour or so, more than likely.
yeah,
So
I'm glad you don't know that detail, Kyle.
yeah, yeah, he was definitely at peace. Abraham told him, fear not, and and then Jacob was at peace in this situation enough so that he was able to sleep in the arms of his grandfather. So I think that's a beautiful thing.
absolutely.
Yeah, and something that kind of jumped off for me, and it kind of did in our last episode, but it's taken a little bit of letting that thought process marinate a little bit of, why is it that we see such this connection with Jacob and all these extra details and all this information, but we don't really see that with Isaac. And I'm not saying that he didn't favor Isaac or he didn't love Isaac or anything like that. I'm not going that direction at all. But there's a different, special, unique kind of relationship here with Jacob. And it's kind of the same thing you're going to see with Joseph, or other times when you see all the brothers and all the relationships are equal, but something's a little different here. Something's a little more special. There's a little bit of more of an attachment.
Yeah.
And it's not a favoring. It's why was Jacob there instead of Isaac? Why is Abraham talking to Jacob like this? Why is Jacob replying back to Abraham like this? We'd never see. And then Jacob received all these blessings and was so excited and went and told his dad. right? It's just like this one-on-one conversation with grandpa and the grandson. And so I've been trying to, like, as we're reading through this, I definitely plan on, and it's something I kind of challenge you guys with as well, is go back into Canon 66, the Genesis story and all of that, and find these details and kind of put them back into maybe like sifting them in some kind of order of, okay, when did Abraham talk to Isaac? And then when did Abraham start talking to Jacob? And then how did Jacob reply to, how did this family dynamic work between the relationships from Abraham, Isaac to Jacob? And why is that the God of stop with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? There's something definitely unique here. And I think that, seeing that he's in Abraham's bosom, and that phrase is carried on through eternity, and to see that this covenant is being renewed with Jacob, who ends up being Israel, and how that's carried on forever. There's something a little more here with Jacob than I think originally meets the eye. So just something I've been really trying to, like, it's just been this lingering thought in the back of my head of, Isaac kind of steps out of the scene for a little bit here and doesn't really come back almost at all. So just interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I'm with you on that. That probably would have been my next thing to bring up is, why wasn't Isaac in the room? Like, we know that this is happening. Why wasn't he in the room? But yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting dynamic there. And it appears that Jacob is the only one in the room. Yeah. So.
Well, I think maybe I'm just going to kind of interject my thoughts into this. I'm not saying, this is what it says, but there's so much emphasis placed on Jacob. But gentlemen, where did all the tribes of Israel come out of? Jacob. So this, I think there's going forth here, there's a wisdom here of Abraham, of knowing that my son Isaac, this is it. This is now Jacob. And from Jacob, I believe that there is something that Abraham is either given knowledge through the father or just through whatever the wisdom the father is given, knowing that through you, my son, will come the nations. Mm-hmm. And so then we see the birthing through Jacob's seed. We see that we have the 12 tribes of Israel. And so I think that's maybe some of that importance there of knowing that we went from Abraham to Isaac, and now son, when it gets to you. And that's why I think Abraham's very specific about don't fear going forth from you. These things are going to happen. And don't, and I pray that, we talked about the blessings in the last episode and all those good things. So I think, to me, this is why I think they kind of know in their spirit, like, hey, your son, you're the one that's going to make this. We went from me to Isaac, Jacob. Now you're going to be that launching pad going forth of a lot happening. Good, bad, and the ugly, but a lot's going to be happening going forth from you. So that's
Joe, do you think this comes from and stems back to when it said Isaac loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob? Do you think it stems back to not that Isaac lost any blessing or that Isaac kind of got his role diminished because of that, but it was like you clearly didn't understand and you didn't watch this play out like according to how everything was supposed to? So again, not that it skipped Isaac, but it just said, Isaac, you're not 100% in line with what the father's plan. And again, not that that's a bad thing. You can be good without being directly involved, right? You can be a good guy with no issues. But then it was like, okay, Jacob and Rebekah, because even you see that it says Jacob went and talked to Rebekah, and then Isaac was aware. So even that conversation first went to Rebekah. So, I do wonder if it's maybe Isaac's a little bit lack of discernment in his earlier years of, oh yeah, it's all about Esau, go Esau, team Esau, it's all Esau. And God's like, well, I mean, if you're going to carry that thought process, we're going to have to let this, shift a little bit.
Yeah. Right. Because, regardless of that, I'm glad you brought it up, because regardless, when we go back to the story of the blessing, we know that, Jacob goes in there and he's like, hey, he's wearing the fur on the arms and there's this whole deceit. And whether, the way I look at that story, Isaac could have been a part of that. He could have of the whole thing, but of knowing what was happening and just kind of went along with it. Or was it what you were saying that, Isaac kind of wasn't really going along with the whole narrative. And so this had to play out to kind of get things going in the way it should. So, yeah, I think there's some different ways to look at it, Jonathan, that maybe he wasn't completely on team Yahuwah all the way with everything. And God's like, okay, so from this seed, we will now But there is a promise given to his mother, though, that I believe that, you know, if I'm not mistaken, that Jacob would be, you know, the one that would come forth many nations and stuff like that as well. So, yeah, there's some, I mean, in the end of it, the Father's got the wisdom. He knows how to do all this, and we see it play out in exactly, I think, the way it should have.
I don't know if he was not all the way team Yahuwah, but maybe not all the way team priesthood mindset.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know, maybe. I also wanted to bring up down here in verse 6, just to point out, you know, again, because this dude gets a really bad rap in the canon. And the voices were heard in the house of Abraham, and Ishmael his son arose and went to Abraham his father and wept over Abraham his father. Ishmael is there, he's present and accounted for, and he's weeping dearly over the situation. And it goes on to say, Abraham, and they wept with great weeping. And going on to verse 7, it says, and his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him. So they were the ones that, Isaac and Ishmael are the ones that actually did the burying. So Ishmael is a present. He's present and accounted for. So he's there. He's in the middle of this stuff, right? So can't count him out. Also, it's a double cave, meaning this is more of a family tomb type thing, right? So it's practice then would have been you have a cave, kind of hewn out of the side of a mountain or whatever, and you know a stone would be placed in front of it, or there would be some kind of door type thing to kind of close it up, but the body would be laid out on a slab, if you will, and once it has gone to bones, once it's deteriorated enough to bones, the bones would be collected and then placed with the other bones from previous generations and things like that, right? So the bones, regardless of the soul, you know, in the direction it goes, the bones are still going to be resting with their fathers either way, right? So that's what that is. So again, this would have been a family type of tomb. So where if multiple people died during the same time frame, they're not having to dig a new cave. So it speaks to preparation. It speaks to financial situation. It speaks to a lot of things, understanding the burial situation there. So I thought that was neat. And then the last thing down here in verse 8, it says, and again, we've read this a bunch of times throughout Jubilees, but it says, being old and full of days.
Yeah.
He completed the days of his life being old and full of days. In other words, I think this is important to speak of here is I think the Father has a plan for each of us, and the days of our life is what He has willed or planned for us. I think that's a certain amount of time that He has planned for us. And I tell people, you know, I don't fear death. You know I'm not going to take my last breath until the Father calls me. Right? I'm not going to die a moment before or a moment after. It's going to be when He calls. That's when I'm going to take my last breath. But I do think that He ordains a certain amount of life for us, and because of our sin and because of our ways, maybe we don't complete the days of our life that we should have. Maybe we don't necessarily always all die old, and we don't always die old, and we don't always die full of our days because of the sin that enters our lives. What do you guys say about that?
Well, I know we're going to pick up on that in verse 9.
Well, why don't we go ahead and do that, Joe? Let's get going here, brother.
Well, no, I had something to say about that.
All right, well, go ahead.
You know, when you're talking about being completed the days of his life, I think this and being old and full of days. I think the full of days means he lived a good long time. 175 years was a good life. Of course, nothing compared to the pre-flood of people living to be 800, 900 years old. But his days were completed. I wanted to go to in John chapter 19, verse 28 through 30. This is the when you said when it's your time to go. This is when Yeshua was on the cross, and in verse 28 of chapter 19 of John, it says, "And after this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. Now a vessel of sour wine was sitting there, and they filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on hyssop, and put it to his mouth. So when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, It is finished. And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit." And I believe what he's saying, what is finished, is what my Father sent me to do is now completed. It is now finished. And I think that's what we're seeing here. And it says, and completed the days of his life, and being all the full of days. Abraham did everything he absolutely could have done in the time that he was allotted, and it was good.
Amen. All right. Well, now get us going in verse 9.
All right. All right, guys, let's pick up in verse 9. It says, for the days of the forefathers of their life were 19 jubilees, and after the flood they began to grow less than 19 jubilees, and to decrease in jubilees, and to grow old quickly, and to be full of their days by reason of manifold tribulation and the wickedness of their ways, with the exception of Abraham. For Abraham was perfect in all his deeds with Yahuwah, and well-pleasing in righteousness all the days of his life. And behold, he did not complete 4 jubilees in his life when he had grown old by reason of the wickedness, and was full of his days. And all of the generations which will arise from this time until the day of the great judgment will grow old quickly before they complete 2 jubilees, and their knowledge will forsake them by reason of their old age, and all their knowledge will vanish away. And in those days, if a man live a jubilee in half of years, they will say regarding him, he had lived long, and the greater part of his days are pain and sorrow and tribulation, and there is no peace. For calamity followeth on calamity, and wound on wound, and tribulation on tribulation, and evil tidings on evil tidings, illness on illness, and all the evil judgments such as these, one with another, illness and overthrow, and the snow and the frost and the ice, and fever and chills and tophor, and famine and death, and the sword and captivity, and all kinds of calamities and pains. Wow.
Bro.
Say it like it is, man.
I got like the whole thing highlighted here just about.
Wow.
Okay. Y'all want to start unpacking this a little bit?
Jonathan, why don't you grab a hold of some of that?
Yeah. So definitely, whenever we were talking in that last little section about being full of days, that's why I said we'll get into it in verse 9. But we'll see the difference in full of days and then no longer full of days. And what I like here, again, I love the numbers aspect of it. So we start off with saying 19 jubilees. And at first, that seems like an arbitrary number and an arbitrary thought process. But if you go to 20 jubilees, so multiply 20 by 50, you get to 1,000. And it seems as though that concept that we've brought up, and it's kind of been floating around as, you know, a day to the Father is like 1,000 years. And Adam says, this day you surely will die. So he's not allowed to live 1,000 years. No one's allowed to live 1,000 years. So 19 jubilees is like 950 or 930, you know, depending on if you count 49 years or 50 years. But it's less than 1,000. So it's saying, yeah, you definitely 19 jubilees. That was okay. No issues. Then all of a sudden it says a jubilee and a half. That's like 75 years. If you live 75, you did a good job. Whew, you made it. And he's like, look at the disparity between that of 19 versus 1.5. I mean, that's not even like a half or a smaller portion. That's almost nothing. We've reduced ourselves down to such a low level of life experience that the Father intended us to have, at least even after the fall. I mean, before the fall was eternity, so there was no jubilees. It was just every year would have been awesome and you'd live it forever. But after the fall, he says, I'll give you 19 of them. And we've systematically broken down the human experience and allowed so much sin and so much negativity in our lives that 1.5, and he's like, we got to get you out of here. We are done, right? And so when we look at these time frames and the way that these play out in our lives, you know, we see, why is it that Abraham was the exception? It said that he was perfect in all his deeds, and that's in verse 10, and that Yahuwah was well pleased in the righteousness of his days of his life. So why do we have so much story of Abraham in Jubilees? Why do we have so much story of Abraham in Genesis? Let's pay attention here, guys, right? It's telling you he's 175. There's a reason for that. You only get to be 75, and you got the cold and the chills and the fevers and the da. Hey, there's a difference between what we're doing in life and what he was doing in life. Let's go back and try to find this example. And yeah, we're probably never getting back to 19 Jubilees, but let's at least have some good 1.5 Jubilees because that's what we're allotted to now. And maybe you can max out at 175 if you figure out a way to do the stuff we're supposed to. So it's I love this section because it sounds all bad, but then there's such this awesome like undertone of blessing there of how do you get out of that?
Yeah, the sad part is all this is because the reason why these days are cut short is because evil continued to increase on the earth.
Right.
And so it's because of the deeds of men. It's like you're your own worst enemy right now. You're the one that's cutting your days short to living to be 75-ish, years old. If you go past 75, I guess that's even, maybe you're doing some things right. I don't know. Maybe not. But, I know that a lot of people, and this is kind of hinted here in this one about the 120 years, when the Father says, well, my spirit contend with men forever or something like that. Or he says, but only for 120 years. I still don't see that passage from Genesis referring to how long we will live. I still see that as a time that God's saying that my presence here on this earth will not contend for another 120 years with this people if they don't repent. So they had 120 years to repent till the time of the great deluge or the flood or the destruction that was coming. I think the Father was actually saying, you got 120 years. And if y'all don't tighten it up and if y'all don't see some repentance, I'm going to destroy this whole place. So for me, still, that's not an indicator of we're going to live to be 120. Because if that was the truth, we don't even come close to that. And here in Jubilees, he's actually telling you, like we just said, a jubilee and a half, and so we're looking at 75 years. So that doesn't give us any credence towards living to be 120 years old. There actually are people today. There's this one guy that he lived to be 145 before he died, and outlived like 3 wives, and was living with his great grandkids. But what the sad part was, he had lived so long that he was actually wanting to die. He's like, I don't want to live anymore. Everyone I've ever loved is not, all of them are gone. And so that was almost like a curse to me, not a blessing that he lived to be 145 years old. But anyway, I digress. But anyway, going back to what we were saying is that the sad part is human beings of doing it to yourself. You're not walking in the ways of Yahuwah. You're chasing wickedness all the time. And God, I think it's what you're saying, John. God's kind of like, you know what? I want you to make it. So I might need to just cut your days short. So, if you live for a long time, you may not make it till the end. I don't know. But anyway, what do you think, Kyle?
Well, Joe, real quick, I just wanted to jump in and say, because you said evil deeds of men. And I think that's huge that, we always need to remember it's humans, it's man, it's personal choice, it's free will. It's us doing us a disservice. Yep. And I just want to clarify something on record. And to say that we read, in one of our previous chapters that Noah prayed to the Father to get rid of a lot of the adversary, right? 90% of adversarial action is now gone in the time of Abraham, in the time of today, 90%. So these guys before, with all the demons, with the 100%, were living way longer than we are today, correct? And yet today we're living way less than we were then. And 90% of the problem, supposedly, if it's the problem, is gone. So where does the problem lie? Who is the real, culprit? As you said, Joe, it's the evil deeds of man. We can't be blaming the stuff on demons and the adversary. Yes, is he real? 100%. Is he playing a part in lives and messing stuff up and throwing wrenches in all the cogs? 100%. But the problem is with man. The problem is with the human. The problem is with the free will that we've been given and choosing the wrong versus choosing the right. So I just want to throw that out there. It just hit me in the head, and I was like, I got to say it. So I said it.
Well, now that my toes are completely flattened, I will. I agree 100%. And kind of backing up, I guess, first speaking to the 120 years thing, I agree with you. This was him saying, you got 120 years until the flood happens, kind of thing. You got 120 years to get your stuff in order. But I also see that it might possibly be kind of a foreshadowing of what is to come with the shortening of life as well. And yes, we do have examples of people living more than 120 years, but on average, people live significantly less than 120 years, right? So I think if the Father would have said, 120 years is all that man is granted, then there wouldn't be a moment more than 120 years that people would be granted. So
because when the Father's word is spoken, that's it, man. That's literally written on the table or tablets in heaven. Like, hey, 120, that's the cutoff. Boom.
Right.
So,
And it's little things like that that give atheists and agnostics a little bit of ground to stand on. So it's understanding these simple concepts like this that show the Bible to be true, that show Scripture to be true.
and every man a liar.
And every man a liar. That's right. So, man, I gotta say that this is one of those things I'm definitely going to have to revisit again and again and again, because I've gone through Jubilees quite a few times, and I've really enjoyed doing this with you guys, because I know we're kind of all coming at Jubilees from different perspectives. This is the first time that this is the second time that I've done a study on Jubilees, but I've read it a bunch and I've listened to it a bunch. Joe, I know you've gone through study a couple times, and Jonathan, this is your first. I know you kind of picked up on when we were doing our previous study. You were kind of there towards the end of it, but this is your kind of first. So we're all coming from different angles, and we all think differently. So that's one of the great things I love about us studying together. But I got to tell you, man, this chapter here, the words that are being spoken here and what we just read really has me rethinking a lot of the end times prophetic things, or things that we think or thought were end times, right? Maybe we don't have quite the understanding that we think we should have when it comes to certain things, such as tribulations and all that stuff. So I will just say this. Let's we need to definitely dig into that a whole lot more, because I mean, if this doesn't speak to you and regarding that, I don't know what will. Right? People are growing old quickly before they complete 2 Jubilees. All their knowledge will vanish away. I mean, good gracious. NASA can't even tell you how they went to the moon the first time. They lost the technology, right?
We don't know where it went. It just got lost. You know what's interesting about that also, Kyle, is the fact that this Jubilee and a half isn't taking place at this moment, because we do see that the sons that come out of Jacob, all of them living to be well past 100 years old. Joseph lives to be 100, I think 110, and the other brothers we see living to be somewhere within that range of 110 to 120 years old, or maybe a little bit older. So this is almost like you were saying, is a prophetic saying, because this is, as the future goes forward, that this will be at some point the average age of a person going. But we see that it doesn't immediately happen after this. That there are people still living to be well into their hundreds. Even the Egyptians at the time, when Pharaoh spoke to Jacob and said, "Hey, how old are you?" He goes, "Well, I'm this old." Because in the Egyptian time, I believe, and I might be wrong, but if anybody knows, in the Egyptian time, if you lived to be at least, I think, 110 or 120 was considered in their culture to be a blessing. Like, hey, wow, you're really blessed to live this long. So that's one of the reasons why I think he asked Jacob, "How old are you?" And Jacob's like, "Well, I'm 100. I think Jacob at the time was 120 or something like that in that story. So Pharaoh would have seen that as a blessing. Oh, well, you were certainly a blessed man to live for that long of time.
Yep.
So there's a lot to go with the whole the how long you live and what you do to fulfill your days and the blessings and all that good stuff. So
kind of getting back to what I was saying there, and all the generation, verse 11, and all the generations which will arise from this time until the day of the great judgment will grow old quickly. So we have this idea of 75 years old, Abraham's girding up his loins and getting out there, getting after it, and going to war. Well,
yeah, we're dying at 75,
right? So I mean, apparently, the aging and people will grow old quickly. The very very next statement, will grow old quickly before they complete 2 Jubilees. So we are aging at a much more rapid rate than this generation of people would have, right? So I mean, at 75, he would have been, that would be like us in our 20s or 30s.
Yeah.
Maybe, right?
Yeah.
As far as health wise is concerned. And let's see, and all their knowledge will vanish away. This is what hit me so hard, is in verse 12, if you live, basically 75 years, they're going to say regarding him, he had lived long. This is the crazy part here. The greater part of his days, in other words, most of his life, are pain and sorrow and tribulation, and there is no peace. Calamity followeth calamity, followeth on calamity, and wound on wound, and tribulation on tribulation, and evil tidings on evil tidings, and illness on illness, and all these evil judgments, such as these, one with another, illness and overthrow, and snow, and frost, and ice, and fever, and chills, and I don't know what torpor is. We might have to look that up. And famine, and death, and sword, and captivity, and all kinds of calamities and pain. So he's saying, look, it's going to continue to get worse and worse and worse and worse as time goes on. And it makes perfect sense to see why Yeshua says when he returns, will he find anyone righteous?
Mm.
You know,
Wow,
because
yeah.
things are just, good gracious, it's just everything's going to have a snowball effect,
Mhm.
getting worse and worse and worse. Man.
Yeah, and we see that as you know, and that's why it's been this building, like kind of like what you're saying, Kyle, as a snowball. We're seeing the story build as all these patriarchs. There says they died at good old age. They, you know, Moses, he was still in good health, and it was the end of his days. Like there wasn't, he didn't die because he had XYZ ailments and he was in the hospital for such amount of years. He was just, well, today's the last day. I'm just letting you know. Hey, let's
Yeah.
pass on the blessing, and now you're in charge, and I'm just gonna be dead now, not because anything's wrong. Just it's over. My story's completed. And today, you know, our stories feel like we're completed at such a young age, because as Kyle brought up, illness upon illness and all these things of, you know, all these days are going to be full of pain. And it's like, yeah, our days aren't finished when the story's over. Our days are finished because our bodies can't survive any longer. We're, you know, we have to, you know, we like the whole phrase, pull the plug. It's like, you know, we're limping our bodies along just to get to the end of what we have, not the end of what we have is the fullness of. And so that kind of played a factor into what we just were talking about. And so a source that I was reading from off of Google, it's from the CDC, so take it or leave it, but it talks about the US birth rate and the life expectancy and all that. And if we account for both two sexes, it's 76.4 years. And I looked at that and I was like, there's no way the reality of this Jubilee story written thousands of years ago is lining up almost to the number of how long people are living right now. 76 is what, a Jubilee and a half? Are we like almost right, spot on? So it's just interesting to see that play out, because, you know, it starts off with they won't complete 2 Jubilees. You're like, okay, maybe 100. You might get there. And now it's like, but then it goes on to say, well, you know, it's Jubilee and a half. Ugh. You know, as we start getting closer to the end, and hey, Jubilee and a half is kind of where we're at. So it's definitely like you said, Kyle, when you start looking at the prophetic and how the implications play out in the rest of the Bible story. You know, this is history, but we're in the modern of this being written. This is written for a future generation, and we are that future generation.
We are it.
Yeah.
So check this out. I looked up that word torpor, and so, you know, previous to this, I mean, essentially all we have is, you know, when somebody gets old, and before this, you know, old was really, really old, right?
Yeah.
Hundreds of years generally, right? And it talks about their eyes grew dim in their old age. That was essentially the kind of the crux of the deterioration of the body that
Yeah.
we really hear about, right? So we've got all of these different things that we just read here, right? All the stuff that's going to happen, and then, you know, fever and chills and da 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 da, and it makes me think about flus and stuff like that, right? But this word torpor down here, I looked it up. A state of physical or mental inactivity,
Mm.
lethargy or lethargy.
Wow.
What? This was written down, you know, thousands of years ago, bro. Like
Mhm.
that's crazy. That's awesome. How about that for prophetic?
Well, especially when you line it up with like all the movies that are supposed to be showing the future. Like I think of Wall-E. You know, they're all in the little pod and they got the TV and everything sitting around them. They don't move anymore. They're all fat, you know, overweight. And so, yeah, it definitely kind of shows like how our generation has gone further from farming and working and, you know, earning a dollar to, you know, TV time, screen time, and at home jobs. So yeah, that's crazy that word's used there.
Wow. And guys, I've really enjoyed this particular portion that we've been reading in Jubilees in chapter 23 so far. It's great. You know, there's a lot of dynamics here in this, going from Abraham actually passing this time and going, and you see the heart, the heartfelt sorrow, everything that's the family pouring into their emotions, and then the passing of Abraham, and that for 40 days they mourned over this man. And then it goes into the wickedness of this world, going into the issues of the heart. And Jonathan, I liked earlier what you brought up was, we read earlier in Jubilees that God stepped in with his mercy and grace with a prayer from Noah and said, you know what? Noah's like, we can't take this. The hearts of men are quickly going back to wickedness, or quickly going back to the things that were pre-flood, and please do something about it. I'm paraphrasing, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And so God in his wisdom goes, you know what? I'll take the 90 because Mestima gets involved and say, hey, leave me 10%. But anyway, so God leaves the 10% here.
He's such a whiner.
I know. So he leaves the 10%, and you're right, Jonathan. Yeah, and with only 10%, we can't always go and blame everything on everything else, and that everything's, are they at work? Absolutely. To the extent that I think we give them credit for, I don't think so. And so I wanted to bring up two scriptures real quick with this. One's in Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. And this is going back into playing into what we just read, guys. The reason why men were growing old at a quick rate was because of them. It doesn't say in here, oh, Mestima and the demons and all this stuff. We're doing all this. Is no, the wickedness of men. Us. We are responsible for our destination. In Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is deceitful above all things. It doesn't say the demons. It doesn't say Mestima, the devil, or anything else. It says our hearts. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Mark chapter 7, verse 21 and 23 says this, for from within, out of the heart of man comes evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness, and all these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. So I think when we're reading through this, we have to be reminded that the fate of man has always been man. Yep. We're our own worst enemy, and we always will be until the end. Yep. And when we get into the verses 14 going forward from here, we'll, get into a little bit more of that.
And we will do that next time for part 2 of chapter 23 in the book of Jubilees. God bless.
Shalom.
Ciao.